you, Andrew, that the class has had, we just started kind of what I would say is kind of a spirited discussion about the idea of, okay, if you're gonna do something about all these gun deaths, you know, what do you do about all these gun deaths? And so we've talked some about, so like if I like wave you off, it's like we've gotten to some numbers. I don't want to get too bogged down, but I think what you bring to the table is a great ability to provide information about logistical issues with regard to gun regulation, which I'm just going to ask a question about or talk about. Spoiler alert, was saying she's, you know, she's carried a gun, she's a gun owner and licensed, whatever that means. And so before we get to comments and question or statements about registration, is there anything you wanted to like start off with?
My opinion is
sorry,
that
no opinions allowed.
my opinion is that there are several moving parts. There's if we were to set everything else aside, let's say even if a hypothetical proposal were to be effective at reducing deaths, is that worth the loss in individual liberty? And we can ask that same question about the freedom of speech, the freedom to move about at will, the freedom to assemble. I mean, these last few months have made us examine a lot of that sort of thing a lot more closely than we probably wanted to. Does the government have the authority to tell people that they can't assemble? We, as law students, obviously you guys are a lot more well versed in the legal issues, but we apply strict scrutiny for First Amendment issues, and the Supreme Court hasn't yet applied strict scrutiny in 2A cases, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily won't. So one thing that I'd like all of you to consider as we talk about policies is, regardless of whether it's effective or not, is it worth it? Is it worth it morally, ethically, and legally? Are we allowed to restrict behavior that much? And of course, obviously, we also have to ask how effective something is. We could look at the drug war for examples of how bans on behavior or possession of things have been completely and totally ineffective. People have this idea that guns are some sort of magical talisman, that they're that you need to be a dark wizard to conjure up a gun, but it's a pretty simple thing. A trip to Home Depot with $20 in your pocket, and you can walk out with a couple of pieces of black pipe, an end cap, a dowel, a nail, and a few minutes later you can have a shotgun. And that's perfectly legal to do also. It's perfectly legal and easy to manufacture guns at home. And that's without using 3D printing, desktop CNC machine, other emerging technologies that are making it a lot easier to manufacture firearms at home. So my position is that prohibition is both ineffective, as demonstrated by the war on drugs and the alcohol prohibition, and illegal.
Okay. All right, yeah, jump in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't go away. Amber, what?
If we can have guns, why can't we have other things like I said, the tanks and the bombs? Why is it just guns? The government has more advanced knowledge and technology and weapons than they did when they wrote the Second Amendment. Wouldn't they have included all the tanks and bombs and all that in that too?
That's a great question, and they did. At the time the Second Amendment was framed, a device called the puckle gun existed. Go ahead and Google that, but that's an impressive thing. And it was common common relatively speaking because it's expensive, but it was common for private citizens to own fully armed ships of the line. They were called privateers, and Congress issued them letters of marque and reprisal for use against other nation states. So the framers did intend the people to have military weapons. I think a better question is, what sort of weapons do you trust your government with, especially given the events of the last couple of months? Do you trust the government to have a monopoly on violence?
Right before you came on, Andrew, I asked them, should we just repeal the Second Amendment? And if we repeal the Second Amendment, why should we, and what does that mean? So, and we've talked a lot about numbers, Heller, constitutional originalists, what the original founders were talking about in well-regulated militia and constitutional Congress's arguments. So they've got some of that background. And they're law students, so they're brilliant. Anyway.
That's a good question. I think at the root of it, there's you're talking about individual versus collective rights. I believe that, yes, of course, these states have some authority against the federal government. Of course, as you're well aware, our under the Articles of Confederation, there was too little central authority. One could argue that there's too much now that I think most people would probably agree that there has to be a balance of power between individual rights along with their individual responsibilities, states' rights and states' responsibilities, that the federal government must have some authority over states. The 14th Amendment is a fantastic example of why and how the federal government exercises legitimate authority. My personal belief is that the only legitimate role of government is to safeguard the rights of citizens. That when government isn't doing that, it's not doing the thing that we allow government to exist for in the first place. I come from a place where I believe that government exists by a mandate from the people. I believe wholeheartedly in the idea of social contract theory of government, that if we allow the government to continue existing, they must be doing what they're there for. And the only thing that they can really do effectively, legitimately, is to safeguard rights. And I don't believe that the government was doing a good job of that when they exterminated American Indians or rounded up Asian Americans and put them in concentration camps, or more recently when they choked a man to death.
So Andrew, let me ask you this, if I can narrow it down then. Do you think that the constitutional amendment, do you think that the Bill of Rights, specifically the Second Amendment, is almost unnecessary? Like, is it muddying the waters? And I say that because the Constitution itself, right, Article 1, Section 8 says that the federal government has a right to create a militia and to finance that militia, and that the states only have the right to, name the generals.
Well, I think you know that there's a distinct difference between a militia and the militia as defined in the United States Constitution, that there were many militias. Also, as you're well aware, the first clause of the Second Amendment simply sets up a reason that the Second Amendment exists, that as the Supreme Court affirmed in Heller and McDonald, the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right of each of the people, just as all of the other rights in the first 10 amendments. Remember that the First Amendment doesn't guarantee a collective right of the state of Illinois to issue a paper. The First Amendment doesn't guarantee the collective right of Maricopa County to have an official religion. It's exactly the opposite of that. The Bill of Rights affirm pre-existing human rights that all of us as individuals have. And the root of the right to be armed is at the root of self-determination. That for you to be truly free, for us to rule ourselves as a representative republic, and for us to comport ourselves individually the way we wish, we have to be able to defend ourselves from the tyranny of the majority.
Okay, so, okay, go ahead. I want to follow up.
Go ahead.
So if we bypass, Andrew, the concept of there's a right to have guns, and we skip to the okay, that's fine. There's a right to have guns, but we want to have some limits, right? That is really where like everybody's in the weeds on, we want to have some limits. Some
Yeah.
people say no limits. Some people say limits. So make your point about maybe some limits.
First of all, were you guys able to read the questions that I emailed a couple days ago?
I read them to him, but I didn't send them to him.
Okay. I'm glad you bring up this idea of compromise, because the fact is, pro-authoritarian control advocates have been arguing for half a century, really the better part of a century, that we should compromise, that gun owners, gun rights activists need to give some ground. Well, we have given lots and lots and lots of ground, to the point that we literally can't count how many gun laws exist now. It's at the federal, state, county, and municipal levels, there are so many gun laws that estimates vary dramatically depending on what you count as a gun law or not. I can't say that there isn't an easy answer to where limits should be drawn. Of course, all rights have some limits. I think Thomas Jefferson articulated the limits of our rights best when he said that rightful liberty, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, but rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to the limits, according to our will, within the limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. Phrased another way, I forget who said it, my right to swing my fists around wildly ends where your nose starts. That the only legitimate restraints put on anybody's actions, anybody's stuff, the things that you can have, the things that you can say or do, the rights, the limits are based on the rights of other people. So it's not that you don't have a right to shout fire in a crowded theater. Of course you do. You have a duty to do so if there is a fire. And it's not that you don't have a right to say the word fire, it's that in very specific circumstances, that action can cause harm to other people. So, do you have a right to own a 1911? Of course. Do you have a right to carry it? Of course, because owning it, carrying it, doing just about anything with it doesn't infringe on the rights of other people until you do something with it, like stand out in front of your lawn and point it at protesters, or rob a liquor store. So we pass laws about what people do with their guns or their cars or their chainsaws or their pool chemicals. Harming other people is wrong, and that's where the limits should exist. As far as the limits of what people should have, I don't believe that there should be any. Except to the extent that we agree that all people, let's say nuclear weapons, because everybody wants to go to the extreme. I submit that nuclear weapons are too dangerous for human beings to have control over, which is why I don't think that I don't want my government to have them. I don't trust you with them, I don't trust me with them, and I don't trust a collective of people with them. I don't trust human beings with nuclear weapons. And if there's a weapon that's dangerous enough that you think I shouldn't be trusted with it, then I want you to think about whether you trust a police officer with it.
So Andrew, to your argument though, you're saying you set the limits at nuclear.
No. I was using an extreme example to illustrate a point.
Yeah, no. I get that. What I'm saying is, that's something that you say, and it's not that extreme. I mean, it's okay. I mean, the idea of like, okay, I don't think people should have tanks. I don't think people should have nuclear weapons. I don't think people should be able to have rocket launchers. Everybody's got their own level of what that is, and there is certainly a huge number of people in this country, and a lot of them say that limit should be like no rifles. No rifle. Why would anybody ever need a rifle?
Why did Rosa Parks need to sit at the front of the bus?
Don't change the subject.
No, you asked why does anybody need? So we don't justify why somebody needs to exercise a right. I don't have to explain to you why I need to worship the God that I do, and I don't have to explain to you why I need to sit at the front of the bus.
That's how the argument is phrased. Why do you need that gun? Isn't that how the argument's often phrased, you guys?
Yeah.
Do you hear that all the time?
People say that often, and they're wrong. I'm not indulging in that, because Like I said, I will not justify my need to vote, my need to speak my mind, my need to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, or any other individual rights. I have those rights, period. Now, if you want to talk about limits on the rights, again, the limits on the rights are what you do to someone else. When you cause harm or act in a manner that's extremely likely to cause harm. Do something very negligent, like shooting a gun into the air or something like that. Obviously, all of those things are things that can be restricted without violating anyone's individual rights. Okay, I don't think anybody out there would argue that laws against shooting a gun in the air violate Second Amendment rights. That's not a tenable position.
Yeah, except people who don't have guns and understand that what goes up comes down.
Well, and I mean, in a strictly physics sense, it's not nearly as.
So, I want to try to get in some comments or questions from people who I haven't heard from. So unless you're really uncomfortable with it, can I hear from some of you other guys that haven't said anything? What do you think?
I'll take a question. I'll advance a question if I can. Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
Thanks for being here. I guess earlier you talked about infringement. Reading the cases and the material that the professor has given us thus far, what keeps re-arising in my mind is this trade-off of like inconveniencing gun owners to save lives. And I know that, like, statistically, gun deaths are, they pale in comparison to like car collisions or cancer or other ways you can die. But at what point for you do inconveniences become inconveniences like licensing and stuff like that? At what point for you does that become infringement? And if it's just,
I like that question. I love that question. Have you ever bought a gun?
Well, I've been gifted a gun.
Okay. Was that like in person from a family member where you didn't have to do a transfer? So you've never actually been through the process of filling out a 4473 and submitting to a background check and all of the things that are involved in acquiring a firearm?
No, my brother went through the process of getting a silencer, and that took a long time.
Okay, that's a fairly extreme example because that invokes the NFA. Silencer is a Title II device, and yes, it takes months. Recently it's taken over a year.
Andrew, give them
but that's off.
Give them the 2-second tour on if you want to buy a gun at the local gun store. What do you
do? For things that are not Title II devices, and what I'm going to say is all at federal level. Many states have additional restrictions on the process, but at the federal level, which applies here in Arizona, if I want to buy a gun, I walk into a gun store, a federally licensed firearms dealer. I pick out the gun that I want. I give them cash. In some circumstances, I may pick up the gun that I want on the internet. People claim, oh, you can buy guns on the internet. Kind of. Technically, the best kind of technically right is the best kind of right. If you buy a gun on the internet, it's still, you pay for it through the distributor, and it gets shipped to the federally licensed firearms dealer. You walk in there, you give them a fee for a transfer, you fill out a one-page form with all of your relevant details, answer some questions about whether you're a fugitive from justice, dishonorably discharged, all of those sorts of things. You answer, yes, I'm the buyer, no, I'm not a bad person, flip it over, sign it. They call the agency responsible for doing background checks in the state. Usually that's the state police, and they'll check the FBI National Instant Check System. Most of the time, that check occurs instantly, so about 5 minutes or so. It's a phone call. They get on, they give the details, they get off the phone. If you're approved, you pay the money, walk out. If you're not approved, then you don't. One area that I think we have some significant room for improvement on is that the ATF seems mostly unwilling to prosecute people who unlawfully attempt to buy a firearm, who lie on a 4473 or purchase a firearm for another person. That's called a straw sale. If you know that the other person's not allowed to buy a firearm and you attempt to buy one for them, that's illegal. Gun dealers are more than willing to report these incidents. They do, but the ATF rarely follows up on them, rarely prosecutes straw sales and people who lie on a 4473. I have a question for you, though. We got kind of distracted earlier. One thing that I'd really like to hear from everybody who proposes any stricter laws than we have already, I would like to hear what you're willing to give up. Because we talk about compromise, but gun owners are the only ones who have been compromising for the last 50 years or so. When I say, in the context of this discussion, I mean people who advocate for greater control and people who advocate for the same or less.
So, and I'll say, Andrew, I told them before, we're just going to go simply, we're going to go like pro-gun, anti-gun. So people on this side or people on whatever it is.
Yeah.
And
of course, there are nuanced positions.
And I kind of laugh because when you say that's a bunch of crap, that's not a very good legal argument. We got to do better than that. But.
There are people in this country that that believe that anyone who isn't white enough should be moved out of the country. That's an extreme position, and I don't think that we should shift the Overton window just for those people. I'm not interested so much about the extremes. Those people are every bit as insane as the people who want to ethnically cleanse the country. And I don't think it's useful to discuss that so much. And I think what's a lot more productive is to talk about policies right now. What exists in terms of policy and which direction we want to move policy. If you want to move policy in the direction of more restrictive, I want to hear, and this is something that I've never gotten a straight answer from anyone who proposes stricter gun control laws, so be the first. If you want to advance laws more strictly, give me something. What would you give me? Would you open the NFA registry for, would you repeal the Hughes Amendment? Would you affirm that the Second Amendment applies to the bearing of arms? Would you, sorry, go ahead.
Wait, time out. So, and also, I just want to point out, Andrew, I think his point was that he doesn't want to compromise by coming closer. He's saying that position is that he wants to eliminate guns altogether. I mean, I'm not saying what your personal position is, but I think his position is, look, I'm already compromising by allowing guns in the country. So the idea that
I fire back that I'm already compromising by letting you have any restrictions, but it's not a productive line of discussion, is what I'm saying. And good luck, because you'll have to call a constitutional convention and repeal the Second Amendment.
Stop, everybody, you guys, we can't all talk on top of each other because we're in a stupid Zoom call instead of in a class the way we wanted to do this.
Well, we shouldn't talk all at once in person either.
You don't get your point across. And I think that, Andrew, I think that was kind of some of, and from a logic standpoint, that makes sense. Oh, we're way over here with, we don't want any guns. And you're saying, look, I'm over here and I'm already compromised enough. You guys got to come to the table a little bit, right? And I think those are good arguments on both sides, because these are the law students who want to be writing the briefs for or against or whatever their boss orders them to do. And I think that is true. And I think Andrew's point is that if there's this way over here, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but like if there's this way over here and Andrew feels like he's already here. He's like, give me anything in here that tells me that there's anything that you might be able to get people who are reasonable gun owners to be more willing to live by.
I have an idea that might be a little bit more productive. Are you willing to make any compromise? Okay. What will you give me?
Right. So what is that? Right. Go ahead.
Okay. So are we getting to the part where you're going to compromise something, where you're going to give something to me? Because I'm hearing you, it sounds like you're working your way down this path where you want me to agree to universal background checks. But before we start having that conversation, I'd like to hear what compromise you're willing to make. Those are good points. Okay. Here are some ideas that...
Before you answer, Andrew, does anybody else have something that...
Yeah, I got something to say real quick.
Right, another compromise on this side. Don't go off on a tangent, or I'll mute you, man. But not you. But you know what I'm saying? What else? Andrew was saying, look, give me something. What are some of the give me somethings?
And can I just offer one point? So when I think of like this argument over just like the right to have a gun. I really think of it in the sense of like the right of defending myself and my family. So when I think of compromise, if you're going to, like you said, restrict my ability to defend my family, I would like to hear ideas of how you're going to protect them from people who will not listen to that restriction or follow that rule. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's not really a compromise either, though.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I agree, but I was hoping that I could hear from somebody who I disagree with, who's willing to yield some ground.
No, I was just saying my piece.
No, that's good. And we want you to say your piece. Are there other compromises that you think, you know, you want to come to the table with somebody who's all about guns and you're not so much about guns? Well, what would you do?
Crazy. She's been in and out of nursing homes and all that. And she can get a license by lying, and she threatened to kill my children.
All right, so
is that, you think that's okay though?
no, that's not,
Okay.
that's not the question.
First of all, that's a terrible debate tactic because you're putting words in my mouth. That's called a straw man. So let's start from the beginning though. Let's pretend like you asked that question in a way that's more suitable for formal debate. No, that's not my position. And in many states, so there are some challenges with HIPAA is in regard to mental health and background checks. Many people, I can't speak for all gun owners, but I would say that many people believe that for one thing, if you have been adjudicated by a court as being mentally delinquent, you cannot purchase a firearm. In some states, those records are reported to NICS, the National Instant Check System, and in some states, they are not reported in NICS. And again, can't speak for all gun owners, but for the most part, most people would not be opposed to states reporting mental adjudications to the NICS system. I firmly believe that it should be. I can't speak for everyone. Yes, states should absolutely report adjudications, and I think that we might be able to do I'm not sure because I'm not a lawyer. You guys might be able to figure it out. I think that I would like to find a way to work through HIPAA and still allow states to report mental health issues as a bar to pass a background check. So,
I can give you the legal answer to the HIPAA because you guys probably aren't as familiar perhaps unless you are and you want to jump in there. But HIPAA has several written exceptions. Every provision in HIPAA has a written exception that if there is a potential danger, there's no HIPAA violation in releasing and providing that information to law enforcement or other authorities.
But the problem is we would have to argue out in the courts to what extent that danger is, right?
No, you do not.
Okay.
No, you can make a call right now, and it's not a HIPAA violation. And of course, HIPAA is only certain. HIPAA doesn't apply to you personally, Amber. HIPAA has no effect on you. HIPAA is a law that affects other organizations, right?
Healthcare providers.
Right. You can make a call, and healthcare providers is very broadly interpreted, but there are exceptions in all health. You call her doctor and you say, this is happening, and her doctor says, I can't call because of HIPAA. The answer to that is that's not true. So just so you know. So HIPAA is kind of and let's not go down the HIPAA path and stuff. I like the conversation, was looking for a compromise, and he mentioned taxes, and maybe he'd change the taxes, maybe he'd consider lowering the number of days before you could buy another gun. He's offering you compromises, Andrew. What about some of those kind of compromises?
Okay.
Some too.
Specifically, would you be willing to reduce the transfer tax for silencers from $200 to $5? Okay.
All right, Andrew, is that a give? Is that a good step?
That's substantive. I don't know if it would be enough of so hypothetically, if you were to lower just the transfer tax for silencers versus other NFA devices, I don't know if gun owners would feel like they're getting enough out of it. But if you're not asking a lot from them either, then that might be useful.
So, Andrew, are most gun owners legally buying their guns?
I don't know, honestly, because the problem is Now, if statistically, as far as surveys, yes, absolutely, overwhelmingly. The problem is that when a stranger calls you on the phone and says, "How many guns do you have in your house?" Do you answer honestly?
Okay, yeah.
Especially if there are illegal guns in the house. Especially if you're in a population that has often been abused by law enforcement in the past.
No, yeah, but I guess that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your transfer taxes. So.
Oh yeah.
If most guns are purchased by lawful gun-abiding, gun-toting thugs, they're purchased lawfully for the most part, and I'm not talking about, your friend who sells you something cool. But in general, most guns are purchased that way. You're going to get your taxes reduced on the sales or whatever the transfer costs. But what about then? Why not go to the make sure that everybody runs a background check? Why not do that? That was something else that was just mentioned.
Okay. So the issue that gun owners have with universal background checks is a few things. One is that there is just no way to do universal background checks without having a registry. And
okay, so we want a registry.
What's that?
So we want a registry.
Okay. So the reason that gun owners are opposed to a registry is that makes confiscation possible. That we have seen we've seen that pattern repeats itself over and over throughout history.
All right, so tell me where that is, because I register my car and nobody comes and takes my car.
That's true, until they do. There are cars are actually banned all the time, and certain features and whatnot on cars are. But I take your point in a more general way. In the past, many nation states have instituted a registry and then gone around and confiscated firearms. We've seen it. So I don't want to invoke Godwin's law, so I'll skip over one of the more famous examples from earlier in the 20th century, but it happened several times under totalitarian regimes, and it also happened under freer nations. And we've seen it most recently in Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, it hasn't happened here, and that Australian.
Except for when we did. Except for when we seized the guns from the Indians, like over and over, and then then exterminated them.
Now. We would never do that.
Yeah.
Now. Gun owners would never allow us to do that now.
Yeah, theoretically. There's only just a hint of sarcasm in there. The reason that we oppose universal background checks is because it can't be done without a registry. And if it can't be done without a registry, we believe that registration leads to confiscation. Well, yeah, you asked the question. I believe that our president...
And Jonathan wants to get in here next.
This current president absolutely would confiscate arms in a heartbeat. I think that individual rights are the furthest thing from his mind. I don't want to get too far off into party politics, but I think that this particular president is a greater risk of confiscating firearms than any other president throughout history. So,
yeah,
is that clear enough?
I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about you don't want to get into party politics. We don't want to argue the politics of it. But the thing about what you're saying, and I think it's very valid, Andrew, is that you are dealing with what you say is based on kind of what you hear, and it's a concern. And if you're a gun owner and you're concerned this is going to happen, then it doesn't matter about the politics of it. If you think it's going to happen, you're not willing to compromise in terms of giving up your guns, especially if you said like you have. Do you think this president is the one who might, because of where his mind is, take away your guns? And it's something you just don't think can happen. But now, Hitler. So what can I say?
Oh, you did it. Godwin's law.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help it. But also,
no, I have one more thing on that when you have a sec.
Yeah, and Jonathan wants to say something, and then
okay.
And then so go ahead. What were you going to say, Andrew?
So the other side to the whole universal background checks thing is, what are you going to do when we just say no and we continue doing things? Personally, so I talk to a lot of gun owners, and I have private conversations with a lot of gun owners. And one of the best places to have a conversation that is really, really private is at a shooting range, because It is super hard to record audio there. I know exactly how difficult it is to get good audio at a range. Gun owners, a lot of we talked about the legal gun owners. I'm pointing like you can tell which direction, which person I'm talking to. You talked about gun owners complying, or you touched on it in the idea of, well, most guns are purchased legally. Gun owners kind of gave up on complying with at least federal gun control and probably most state gun control back in the 90s. For the most part, many of them don't care, and they're not doing it anymore. So these laws that we're proposing, you're gonna have to get their buy-in, because they're not going to do the universal background check. They're not going to. They're going to sell it anyway.
They'll just go around.
Yeah. So maybe a better question is, how could you convince them to do a background check voluntarily? Because if you gave me the option to do a background check before I sold a gun, and if I felt secure in the idea that you're not going to steal my information, that it's not anonymized properly, that the code is available for audit, I think many of us, you're not going to get 100% compliance with anything, but I think you'll probably get a greater percentage of compliance with a voluntary background check system than you ever could with a mandated background check system, because I'm telling you, they're not complying.
Pass a seatbelt law, don't enforce it, people comply 80 to 90%. Seatbelt law, same thing. So that's a great, I think that's a great point that you're saying, and even maybe in the 70s, if you had passed a law in the 70s that said, okay, we're going to register everybody's guns, everybody's got to do a background check. In the 70s, people might have done that. But 50 years later,
the pro-authoritarian crowd has lost a lot of credibility because they say over and over, oh, well, we're not coming for your fill in the blank. We don't want your granddad's Southern Baptist religion. We're only going after these cult members. And then through a series of creeping incrementalism, we have seen them put lie to that every single time. Every time that they said, oh, we're not coming after this thing. And then more recently, they've abandoned that facade entirely, and several of them have been willing to state publicly, yeah, we're going to come around and seize them all. And that brings up the point that anybody who thinks that they're anti-gun is really not anti-gun. They're pro-state monopoly on violence, because who do you think is going to enforce these gun laws? It's men with guns. So what you're really advocating for is for men with guns to go use force against people about guns. And I know you don't know me. You have no idea whether I'm a good and moral person, but do you trust me with a gun more than you do the man who choked out George Floyd?
okay, so that's a good question that we're going to leave standing on the table. Do you have something to say? Because that's a fair question. What do you mean vigilante justice? Isn't what vigilante justice?
I don't think anybody proposed giving everyone a gun. I'm not much of a socialist, so I don't really believe in government programs like that. I know that there are some socialist gun owners that probably would support a government program to hand out firearms to everyone. I would think that those people would probably also not actually include everyone. Something like that would probably still have background checks involved. But nevertheless, nobody brought up handing out guns to everyone.
Yeah, and I think Andrew said before that your right as a gun owner ends when you violate somebody else's right.
Well, vigilantism would be if I'm going to go out and find someone that I believe has committed a crime and apply a punishment to that person. If I believe that somebody's committed a crime and I go out and I arrest them and I bring them to court, that's a citizen's arrest. Having a gun and using it if I'm attacked is not even close to vigilantism. And I don't think anybody's, I didn't hear anyone, and I certainly didn't make the claim that we should be going out and punishing people that we suspect of a crime. And I don't think that it's even related. You shouldn't. You shouldn't trust your government on anything.
Andrew, I have a question for you. Jonathan, did you have a question? And I have a question for Andrew.
to answer your more pointed question at the beginning, absolutely. That has the fight been? I don't want to say that the fight's been lost in the sense that it's over and that there's no hope. But yes, absolutely. I believe that certain states have gone way beyond the constitutional limits drawn around the authority of government to regulate the individual right to bear arms. And I mean, can you imagine if we had to pay a fee and attend classes to worship as we please, or to get a permit to publish a paper, or if there was a limit on the number of papers that a publishing house could publish? We would not tolerate the sort of restrictions that we see on the right to bear arms wouldn't even be on the table. It wouldn't even be discussed, and never has been throughout all of our history, throughout all of the Jim Crow laws and bizarre, messed up laws that local governments have had on many of our other individual rights. We've never seen a city say that you have to pay a permit fee, and attend a class to attend church. I mean, it's just preposterous.
So,
Church won't kill you. Or can't kill you. Okay.
Oh, they don't?
yeah, and so, wait, all right, yeah, we're not going down
Religions kill a lot of people.
We're not going down that path. So, that's the advantage of being the instructor. Because I think but what I'm hearing Andrew say is that, he froze for a second. What I'm hearing Andrew say too is that, like, he sees the First Amendment and the Second Amendment as equal rights that should be protected equally and enforced equally, and he doesn't see, and again, I know I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm just translating it into the boring lawyer people like that I am, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. You have this absolute right to the First Amendment and the fire argument, fire in the crowded theater thing, which they've all learned in con law. But I think maybe to this point, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but I mean, just to kind of pony off what you were saying, the concept that we haven't given that same deference to the Second Amendment.
We haven't applied strict scrutiny.
And I would say that in part that's because we have a 200-year vacancy in case law. Because there was no case law until the last 20 years, essentially.
Because we only incorporated the Second Amendment in this century.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. You mean into the 14th Amendment? Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Sure. So, right. So it didn't come up. So now, and with just saying, kind of, we already kind of lost it. Are we on the slippery slope? The states are doing all these different things. Maybe what we're seeing right now, and for the next 10 or 15 years, the court, as I'm sure you know, Andrew, denied certain 10 gun cases this summer. 10 cases. I was like, holy cow.
If we have time for it, I'd love to hear some opinions if anybody cares to comment. There are a lot of theories on why the Supremes decided not to grant cert on those cases.
We actually talked about that. I already gave him my pitch, so if somebody else has a pitch. Anybody else want to chime in on why you think the Supreme Court denied cert on those 10 cases? Otherwise, Andrew, I'll tell you offline.
Okay.
Happy to give you my opinion on that.
Thank you.
For sure. So what I did want to ask, though, Andrew, is about like this comment about have you lost this fight already? But I see it also another way is that a little bit of herd mentality here. When you say, "Oh, none of us are doing this," and I know you're not saying none, but you know what I mean. Just stick with me here. None of us are doing this. None of them are doing it. We feel like we're so down the road on what mainstream America, and I'm kind of making that up too, right? But this is what we need to have. I mean, a kid who was a survivor in the Parkland shooting, who's out there arguing for gun legislation. He doesn't, what you and your compatriots, again, big broad brush, are advocating, he doesn't even see. So are you, in the same way that he only sees because he's around like-minded, are you only seeing because you're around like-minded? Or not even necessarily you, the others around you? Because you're clearly working this. You're well read in it.
I think that all of us, no matter where, all of us are susceptible to confirmation bias, tribalist thinking, and echo chambers. I think that if we care, and I mean legitimate, if you legitimately value the truth rather than just being right, if you're more concerned about finding the truth than being right, if you're more concerned about taking actions that will actually work. I mean, we can yell at each other all the time, but if you want to know what's going to make a difference, you have to learn what I like, and vice versa. That we have to force ourselves out of these echo chambers, and we have to.
What will work, Andrew? What are some things that you think will work? Ideally, I think that the confrontation is that gun violence causes injury, death, suicide, whatever. So it's not the guns, of course, it's the actions. So what will change the actions?
Well, a lot. It's going to take me a minute to unpack. To begin with, I think that it's important in this subject as well as most subjects that we understand that that a utopia isn't possible. That regardless, even if we were to push every single most draconian rule that you can come up with, that's simply not it's not possible to end violence. It's not possible to end human suffering. It's not possible to create a utopia, and we shouldn't attempt to. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth trying to make some changes that push things in a generally positive direction. So what could we do that would do that? I think, as everybody says when we start talking about this, obviously this country has just an awful position with mental health, and that's a huge, complicated issue that we can't pack into a soundbite. Another thing that I think I touched on briefly, I would like to see the ATF audited and reformed. I believe that there are far too many crusaders in the ATF trying to push their idea of what ought to happen. I believe that we have allowed the ATF to act as almost a legislative branch in issuing opinions. And I mentioned how the ATF seems to be not entirely, but mostly unwilling to prosecute demand side illegal gun purchases. I mentioned how when gun dealers report straw sales and people who lied on the 4473, that the ATF almost never follows up. If you walk into a gun store and you fill out a 4473 and you lie on it and you get denied, somebody should show up at your house and arrest you. I mean, that's a no. We've got everything. You showed a driver's license, so the dealer knows that the information that you filled out on the 4473 matches what was on the government-issued ID card. He won't let you go any further if it doesn't match. I know, because in Arizona you can have an address on your license that doesn't match your actual residence. I filled out a 4473 and not thinking about, oh crap, it doesn't match. The dealers, like most normal people don't want to supply criminals. A lot of pro-authoritarian type people have this idea in their head of this I don't know, this Hollywood caricature of what a gun dealer is, but it's like any other business, like a car dealer, except probably a little bit less shady because there aren't ginormous loans involved. And commissions. They want to report these crimes, and they do report these crimes. But the ATF does little about it. The ATF seems to be more interested in putting someone out of business over a typo or selling guns to Mexican cocaine dealers than they are in actually pursuing the sort of crimes that would reduce the supply of guns to criminals.
I get it. ATF screwed up. Okay. Sorry. Wait, Jonathan, before you pipe in.
Okay, go ahead.
Has a question too. I know, Jonathan, every time you try to say something, I cut you off.
No, it's fine.
Is it, Jonathan, is it related to what Andrew was just saying?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and pipe in and then jump in there.
Just a real quick question on the, what did you say, the 44, what form was that?
4473.
To enforce that, and Professor, you might know this as well, do they need a federal agent at the gun store, or they just need to have like a federal agent there, or an ATF agent?
So
Or how would they do that?
there's a lot of different ways they could approach it, but it's an official government form. So lying on it is already lying on the form is a crime, and attempting to purchase a firearm when you know that you're not allowed to is also a crime. They're both federal, probably felonies. Don't quote me on that.
But a sheriff can't enforce that. Like
It depends on state laws and
But Jonathan, his point is, I think his point, Jonathan, just to simplify this, is that these are federal laws. As a federal law enforcement officer, I can enforce any federal law, and that ATF plus any other federal agency that has that type of authority. The FBI has authority over every single thing that the ATF has authority over. And so we could go in. The gun owner reports to us, the gun shop owner says, hey, this guy did this. And Andrew is saying, why aren't they going to that guy's house and saying, we're going to charge you with a crime? And
so
I mean,
is it just a lack of resources then? So
I was going to say the short answer is it really does involve a lack.
it's an allocation of resources.
No, Andrew, you can nod your head, but I'm just telling you, it's a resource issue. When your threshold for
yeah.
a crime is $750,000, or you can get away with the embezzlement, there's a resource issue that's very substantial.
There's
not allocations.
There's also been a cultural issue in the ATF where they have intentionally and repeatedly chosen to investigate the sorts of crimes that
Sure.
are easy and low risk rather than.
There's no question about it. Certain agencies and certain departments, they go for that low-hanging fruit. They get the stat. It doesn't it doesn't solve the bigger picture. And so I completely.
They're not busting the Hell's Angels and MS-13 because that would be expensive and difficult.
Wow.
And
Some of you guys haven't said anything or asked anything. And Jacob, you wanted to pop in?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to circle back to something that Andrew had said, where he was against all the mandatory education and licensing of gun owners, and kind of comparing it to that of going to church. And I thought that was a very unfair comparison.
Okay. And why? Tell because he can't answer right unless you can kind of explain it. So I know you were probably gonna, but just explain why you think that's unfair. Because what I said was 2 amendments.
Yeah. So I'm my background growing up was always playing Call of Duty. Never had any guns anywhere around the house. But as I got older, I started going to the range, purchasing my own, and I believe education kind of gave me that grasp of taking a gun class, a hunter safety class, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Gave me a grasp of how to properly handle the firearm to prevent accidents, but also educated me to the fact that they're not just toys. They're not, this, that, or the other thing. It's a tool that can cause harm. And I think a more appropriate comparison would be to that of a vehicle. A gun sitting on a table isn't going to hurt anybody, as if a vehicle sitting in a driveway isn't going to hurt anybody. But when you use that, and especially improperly, stuff happens. Since as we license and teach, require people to drive cars with having an education background and training, I believe we should have some form of education before somebody can purchase their first firearm. Teach them the basics, range safety, proper storage, proper handling of a firearm to prevent accidents, at least.
Okay.
If not for regulation of the gun itself.
First of all, I'm absolutely not opposed to training. I believe that everybody should participate in as many training classes as schedule and budget permits. Back to your vehicle analogy, I want to note something that to the best of my knowledge, and correct me if I'm missing something, but to the best of my knowledge, in every state, it is perfectly legal for a 10-year-old to purchase any motor vehicle they want and to operate it on their own private property in whatever manner they want. There are no restrictions whatsoever on who can buy cars, what kind of cars they can buy, how many cars they can buy, waiting periods, or any of these restrictions that are placed on guns don't exist for motor vehicles. What does exist for motor vehicles are restrictions on what you can do with the car, where you can operate it, and what sort of classes you need to have to operate the vehicle safely where there's other people on the road. So if you wanted to propose that that the state should invest the kind of money in public ranges that they do in the road system and require that people participate in training classes to use those ranges, I don't think you'd find any argument from people, maybe about the budgetary concerns. Arizona Game and Fish Department runs the Ben Avery shooting facility, which is on the I-17 and is it Carefree Highway, I think.
Is that
the largest public shooting
that has the
Yes.
1,000 range?
Yeah,
and
it's huge.
The whole skeet.
It's the
Yeah,
largest
that's cool,
public
yeah.
shooting facility on the planet.
That
It's
place is
awesome.
incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
To use that facility, you have to do they have a quick little training video, but you have to do that. You have to sign a paperwork to use that range. Is that an imposition on the Second Amendment? No, of course not, because we are telling people that to do this thing, you have to have the training. So back to the first question about should we require training? I believe that gun safety should be a required class in primary school. I believe that in the lower grades, that the appropriate gun safety training for that age group, that the appropriate gun safety training for children is, if you see a gun, don't touch it, leave the area, tell an adult. That's it. Don't touch it, leave the area, tell an adult. That's what we teach kids. And everybody through probably about 8th grade or so should be taught, don't touch it, leave the area, tell an adult. Starting in high school or so, they should probably be taught more accurate, more grown-up gun handling safety, which is the 4 rules of firearm safety are: treat all firearms as if they are loaded and ready to fire, never point a gun at something you're not willing to put a hole in, keep your finger off the trigger, away from the trigger until you have decided to fire, and be sure of your target and what's behind it. I absolutely believe that that sort of thing. You know what's funny is that gun control groups often brand themselves as gun safety groups, but I have never, ever, ever seen any of them publish any gun safety materials, classes, anything relating to actual gun safety. And most of them oppose gun safety in schools. So yes, I think that training should be mandatory. Yes, I think all people should receive gun safety training. Should it be a prerequisite to exercise your rights by possessing and carrying a firearm? Absolutely not. There should be no preconditions on exercising individual rights.
So we only have like 5 minutes left of Andrew's time, although Andrew, I'm really hoping that next week we might get a chance to just go over all of the Virginia laws at the same time. I want to call in for that one, but we'll go over them as a block. But in these last 5 minutes, because I've got another speaker coming online shortly, in these last 5 minutes, what else would you like to know from Andrew or John? You can make your last pitch here on. Or Andrew, is there something that you wanted that you feel like we didn't get to?
If you can you email out those questions that I that I emailed you earlier? I would. We don't really have time to dig into it much, but just to briefly touch on it, so it's on your heads.
Email out those questions. I'd love for you guys to email back, and if you want, I'll copy Andrew in them, and you can email him back directly.
Thank you. And don't feel like you have to. It's just some stuff to consider.
It also gives you a person that you can talk to who maybe who is like-minded or not like-minded, who can teach you and who can, who you can teach. Go ahead.
You're welcome to pass on my email address. You guys are welcome to email me. That doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to answer. I have a wife and kids and 2, 3 jobs, depending on how you want to count them.
Yeah, so do all these people online. They all have kids and jobs and they're all doing this. Most of them are filling out part-time and struggling through their own the same way, so they get it.
Have you ever heard of Hold My Guns?
Oh, they haven't. You know what? Absolutely. That's a good point. You guys, everybody look that up. Hold My Guns, but not this very second.
HoldMyGuns.org is an organization that coordinates with federally licensed firearms dealers to hold guns for anybody who just wants guns out of their house for indefinitely, really. That if you feel, if you're in a dark place, if you just don't feel like you want to have them around, get in touch with Hold My Guns, and they'll make arrangements to keep them safely.
They'll hold on to your guns. So I think that's part of it.
Free.
Is I think there's a lot in the gun industry, in the people who do in the gun world that people aren't aware of too, when you're looking for solutions. So I think your point though is that you're looking for other ways. What are other ways to prevent the gun violence? Anybody else?
Yes, anyone else?
Jonathan, please do it, please, because I've cut you off so many times.
But I feel like Andrew has given us a lot of information and perhaps triggered us all a little bit. So I kind of wanted to trigger him and say that the AR platform is overrated. I don't know anything about guns. I was just
Well, if you're ever in Phoenix, I'll take you shooting sometime, and I'll change your mind.
cool.
All right, we could do this for several more hours, but honestly, everybody, I got to tell you, Andrew, these guys have been in class since 9 o'clock this morning. So,
Yeah.
this has been a long day for them, and we have one more speaker to go. So I'm going to let you go. I'd love to have you back if it works out, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time and the opportunity to listen and
Thank
to
you.
provide and to train, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That was fun.
Yeah.
And
Thanks a lot.
All right.